Before the sun's rays cut through the smog of Lagos, before the dense hum of the city became unbearable, Ruth stood at the entrance of her small, run-down apartment, watching the city slowly awaken. The smell of fried plantain mixed with the staleness of the nearby markets as she took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air against her skin. The day was already heavy with expectation, but Ruth had learned to carry her burdens silently. Ruth, a widow in her early 40s, had lived through the heartache of losing her husband 5 years ago. Yet, it was not the emptiness of her marriage that weighed most on her, but the loss of the future they had dreamed of. Every day, she struggled to make ends meet, often forgoing meals just to pay her rent. Her work as a seamstress did not bring in much, but it was enough to keep her going. Yet, she still found the strength to offer food and comfort to those in need, a kindness passed down from her mother, a woman who had raised her alone. One day, as Ruth stood at the market waiting for her daily groceries, a small boy approached her. His face was dirty, his clothes torn, and he was so thin that his bones nearly stuck out. His eyes were deep with sadness, but they looked at her with something else, hope. Ruth noticed him lingering near her as she bought fish. Without much thought, she purchased extra bread and handed it to him. "Take this, child," she said, her voice soft. The boy nodded, accepting the bread without a word. He never said thank you. He never spoke much at all. Ruth assumed he was just another orphan of the city, too young to fend for himself. Little did she know, that simple act of kindness would alter her life forever. Before now, Ruth's life was not always this way. She had once been a bright young woman, full of dreams and hope for a family. Her marriage to Michael had been a whirlwind romance, one filled with laughter, promises of a better life. But after his sudden passing, everything changed. Ruth was left with a small apartment, a sewing machine, and memories that haunted her every waking moment. Ruth's mother, a quiet and resilient woman, had always taught her that kindness is the only wealth a person can truly own. Ruth had spent much of her childhood with her mother, sharing a cramped, tin-roofed home on the outskirts of Lagos. She remembered the days when her mother would gather the neighborhood children and feed them. No questions asked, no conditions attached. Despite the hardships they faced, Ruth's mother never once complained. She believed that their small acts of kindness would somehow lead to a better life for her daughter. Ruth held that lesson close, but it was harder to practice than she had imagined. The boy, who Ruth had taken to calling Tommy, appeared every day, standing outside her door as if waiting for her. His presence became a strange comfort, and Ruth couldn't help but feel responsible for him. Every evening, she would prepare an extra meal, sometimes rice and stew, sometimes yam porridge, and offer it to him. He would always accept, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the food. Tommy never spoke much, never told her where he came from or who he was, but the connection between them grew, unspoken yet powerful. It was at church, under the cracked stained glass windows, that Ruth first noticed something different about Tommy. As the congregation sang hymns, Ruth felt a gentle tug on her sleeve. Turning, she found Tommy standing there, his hands clasped together in silent prayer. For the first time, he looked up at her, his eyes not filled with sadness, but with gratitude. Ruth felt something stir within her. She had always believed in the power of faith, but seeing Tommy in this moment, his silent reverence, made her believe that perhaps, against all odds, he had found a piece of peace. Over time, their bond grew deeper, and Ruth began to feel that Tommy was a part of her life in ways she had not anticipated. He began to help her around the house, sweeping the floor, gathering water, and fixing small things. She couldn't quite explain it, but there was something about his presence that brought a quiet strength to her home. She found herself looking forward to the moments they spent together, whether it was over a bowl of soup or while mending clothes. One evening, Ruth found herself sitting on the edge of her bed, watching Tommy sleep on the small mat in the corner. As she gazed at his peaceful face, she realized that, in a way, he had filled the emptiness in her life. She had given him food, shelter, and care, but in return, he had given her a reason to believe in hope once again. It wasn't long before Tommy began to show a different side of himself. He was no longer the quiet, withdrawn boy who needed food. He had transformed into someone who seemed to understand Ruth's inner struggles. They began to spend more time together, and Ruth began to see a tenderness in him that she had not expected. Ruth's friend, Mary, however, was not so sure. She had always looked out for Ruth, and she was growing concerned about the boy. One afternoon, as they sat over tea, Mary gave Ruth a cautious look. "You have to be careful, Ruth," she said gently. "He's not your responsibility. You've given him enough. Don't lose yourself in him." Ruth shook her head, her heart heavy. "He's just a child, Mary. He needs help, and I'm all he's got." But Mary was persistent. "I understand, but remember, gold that shines too brightly can burn your hand." Ruth tried to push aside the nagging feeling that Mary's words invoked. She wanted to believe in the goodness of Tommy, but there was a growing suspicion that perhaps Tommy had a past that she did not know. One evening, Ruth returned home early from a visit to a local market, only to overhear a conversation between Tommy and a man she did not recognize. Ruth stood frozen in the doorway, listening as Tommy spoke. "You've done well, Tommy. You've played your part," the man said in a low, calm voice. "She trusts you. Now it's time to deliver." The words hit Ruth like a slap to the face. Betrayal. She had given this boy everything, and he had deceived her all along. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stepped into the room, her heart breaking. "What have you done?" she whispered. Tommy's face hardened, and for the first time, Ruth saw the coldness behind his eyes. "I'm sorry, Ruth," he said quietly, his voice distant, "but I had to do this." The betrayal was more than just the lies. It was the realization that the boy she had nurtured had never been an orphan at all. He had been sent to her as part of a plan she had unknowingly supported. In the days that followed, Ruth withdrew into herself. She could not fathom how Tommy, the boy who had stolen her heart, could betray her so completely. But as the anger subsided, Ruth found herself focusing on what she had left, her strength, her resolve, and the dignity that came from living with integrity. Ruth began to gather the pieces of her life that Tommy had broken. She consulted lawyers, sought out financial aid, and started to take back control of her home. Each step was quiet, measured. Her victory would not come from confrontation but from her ability to stand tall in the face of betrayal. The showdown took place in a small courtroom, the heat of the day pressing in on the crowded room. Tommy's accomplice stood before the judge, confident in his victory, while Ruth stood resolute, her eyes clear with determination. As the trial unfolded, Ruth revealed the truth, presenting evidence of the manipulation she had unknowingly fallen into. Tommy's betrayal was exposed for all to see. The judge's gavel struck. The man was convicted. Ruth, standing quietly in the back of the room, felt no joy in the victory. The damage was done, but she had fought for her integrity. Tommy disappeared from her life, and Ruth's world began to shift in unexpected ways. She found solace in small acts of kindness, a neighbor bringing over fresh fruit, a stranger offering her a seat on the bus. These moments of connection, small and unnoticed, were the ones that truly healed her. And then there was Michael, a kind man who had always been there in the background, watching Ruth from afar. Slowly, over time, they began to build a new friendship, one based on mutual respect and understanding. As the days passed, Ruth sat with her mentor, Mary, in the quiet of the evening. They shared tea, and Ruth spoke of the new path she was walking, the lessons learned, and the quiet peace she had found. It was a simple moment, but it felt like the beginning of something new. Ruth had healed, and in her heart, she carried the hope that one day, she would pass on the lessons of love, kindness, and resilience to others, just as her mother had done for her.